The first time I saw Margaret Whitfield, she was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn with her hands on her hips, staring at my 1987 Ford F-150 like it was a plague-ridden wagon that had somehow rolled into her pristine neighborhood. Her blonde hair was pulled back in what I'd later learn was her signature, "I'd like to speak to the manager" style, and her lips were pursed so tight they could have cracked walnuts. I had just moved into 432 Maple Grove Lane, a modest ranch house that my late grandfather had left me. The house needed work, sure, but it was mine, free and clear. What I hadn't expected was the immediate hostility from the neighborhood's self-appointed Queen Bee and HOA president, Margaret Whitfield of 434 Maple Grove Lane. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that wealthy suburban women perfect over years of complaining at country clubs. "Are you the new resident?" I wiped the grease off my hands with an old rag and walked over to where she stood at the property line, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft earth between our driveways. Up close, I could see she was probably in her early 50s, with the kind of artificial perfection that money could buy: Botox smooth forehead, professionally whitened teeth, and jewelry that caught the afternoon sun like tiny spotlights. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Jake Morrison. Just moved in yesterday." I extended my hand, but she looked at it like I was offering her a dead fish. "I see. And that vehicle belongs to you?" She gestured toward my truck with the disdain usually reserved for roadkill. My F-150 wasn't much to look at, I'll admit. The red paint had faded to a rusty orange in places. There was a dent in the passenger door from where my cousin had backed into a tree 5 years ago, and the tailgate didn't quite close properly anymore. But that truck had been with me through high school, college, my first job, and 3 cross-country moves. It had hauled furniture, helped friends move, pulled stumps out of yards, and never once left me stranded on the side of the road. "Yes, ma'am, that's Bessie. She's been good to me for about 15 years now." Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched higher. "Bessie? You named that eyesore?" "Every good truck deserves a name," I said, keeping my tone light despite the insult. "She might not be pretty, but she's reliable." "Well, Mr. Morrison, I'm Margaret Whitfield, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. I'm sure you received our welcome packet when you purchased the property." I had indeed received a thick manila envelope full of rules, regulations, and restrictions that read like a prison handbook. No vehicles over 10 years old visible from the street. No commercial vehicles, no trucks used for business purposes. The list went on for pages. I did, thank you. Though I have to say, some of those rules seem a bit restrictive. Margaret's smile was sharper than a butcher's knife. "Mr. Morrison, Maple Grove isn't just any neighborhood. We maintain certain standards here. Property values, you understand. That truck of yours is in direct violation of Section 4.2 of our vehicle policy." I felt my jaw tighten. "Ma'am, with respect, that truck is registered, insured, and legally parked in my own driveway. I'm not sure what the problem is." "The problem, Mr. Morrison, is that your grandfather understood the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards. He drove a respectable sedan and kept his property immaculate. Now we have this." She gestured again at my truck, her diamond bracelet catching the light. That hit a nerve. My grandfather, Samuel Morrison, had been a proud man who'd worked construction his entire life before buying this house as his retirement dream. He'd scrimped and saved for 30 years to afford a place in what was then a working-class neighborhood before it got gentrified and fancy. "My grandfather was a good man who worked hard for everything he had," I said, my voice cooler now. "And this truck represents the same values he taught me: function over form, substance over flash." Margaret laughed, a sound like tinkling glass that somehow managed to be both musical and cruel. "Oh, how noble. But Mr. Morrison, this isn't about your grandfather's values or your sentimental attachment to that rust bucket. This is about property values and community standards. That truck is an eyesore, and I guarantee you that within 30 days you'll receive a formal notice to remove it from street view or face daily fines." She turned on her heel, her Jimmy Choo shoes clicking against the concrete, but paused to deliver one final blow. "And just so you know, I drive a Range Rover Evoque. Now that's what a vehicle should look like." As if summoned by her words, a gleaming white SUV sat in her driveway like a monument to excess. It was beautiful, I'll give her that. All smooth. Lines and chrome accents, probably worth more than I made in a year at my job as a freelance carpenter and handyman. Over the next few weeks, the Cold War between Margaret and me escalated. It started small. She'd make snide comments when we happened to be getting our mail at the same time, always with that fake smile plastered on her face. She'd complain to other neighbors about my unsightly vehicle, though most of them seemed more amused than concerned. The Hendersons next door even complimented Bessie, saying she reminded them of the truck Mr. Henderson's father used to drive, but Margaret was relentless. True to her word, I received my first official HOA violation. Notice exactly 30 days after our initial meeting. It was printed on official letterhead and delivered by certified mail, demanding that I remove or relocate the non-compliant vehicle within 10 business days or face daily fines of $50. I attended the next HOA meeting, held in the community center's bland conference room that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. Margaret sat at the head of the table like a corporate queen, flanked by her loyal supporters, mostly other affluent retirees who seemed to have nothing better to do than nitpick their neighbors' lives. As you can see from the photos, Margaret was saying, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that she'd apparently spent considerable time preparing, Mr. Morrison's vehicle creates a significant visual disturbance to our neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. The photos were brutal. She'd taken them from every conceivable angle, some clearly enhanced to make Bessie look even rustier and more decrepit than she actually was. There were comparison shots showing her pristine Range Rover next to my truck, like a before and after advertisement for automotive evolution. Furthermore, Margaret continued, property values in similar neighborhoods have shown measurable decreases when non-conforming vehicles are permitted to remain visible from public streets. I stood up when she finished her presentation. With all due respect, Mrs. Whitfield, I'd like to address a few points. First, my truck is parked legally on my own property. Second, it's registered, insured, and passes all state inspections. Third, the rule about 10-year-old vehicles seems arbitrary and potentially discriminatory against people who can't afford newer cars. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, but Margaret's supporters looked at me like I'd just suggested we turn the neighborhood into a trailer park. Mr. Morrison, Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. This isn't about discrimination, it's about standards. When you choose to live in a community like Maple Grove, you're making a commitment to uphold certain values. That means making sacrifices for the greater good. What sacrifices have you made? I asked, genuinely curious. She looked taken aback. I beg your pardon? You're asking me to get rid of a perfectly functional vehicle that I rely on for my work because it doesn't meet your aesthetic standards. What have you sacrificed to maintain these community values you're talking about? Margaret's face flushed slightly. I've invested considerable time and energy into maintaining this neighborhood's standards. I've donated thousands of dollars to community improvements. You've spent money that you could easily afford to spend, I interrupted. That's not really a sacrifice, is it? That's just spending money. The room got quiet. Even Margaret's supporters seemed uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Margaret recovered quickly, her smile returning with practiced precision. Mr. Morrison, I can see that you're not interested in being a productive member of this community. Very well. The violation stands, and fines will begin accruing as of Monday morning. I suggest you use the weekend to make arrangements for alternative parking. I left that meeting feeling frustrated and defeated. The fines would add up quickly, and as a freelance worker, I couldn't afford to hemorrhage money on principle. But something about Margaret's smug superiority made me want to dig in my heels. The weekend came and went, and Monday morning brought my first $50 fine, delivered with the same bureaucratic precision as the original violation. Tuesday brought another. By Wednesday, I was starting to seriously consider my options. That's when old Pete Henderson from next door knocked on my door with a cup of coffee and some unexpected advice. You know, Jake, he said, settling into one of my grandfather's old kitchen chairs, Margaret's got herself a bit of a problem that she doesn't like to talk about. What kind of problem? Pete grinned, revealing teeth stained by 60 years of coffee and cigarettes. She's got herself a lead foot and an attitude problem when it comes to driving. Lost her license twice in the past 5 years, once for speeding, once for reckless driving. Her fancy SUV's been sitting in that driveway for 3 months now, and she's been taking Uber everywhere. Thoughts. 2 days after the snow incident, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No postmark, no official HOA letterhead, just my name written in elegant cursive handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note that made my blood run cold. Mr. Morrison, we need to talk. There are things about your grandfather in this neighborhood that you don't know. Things that Margaret Whitfield would kill to keep secret. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 7 p.m. if you want to know the truth about why she really wants you gone. A friend, I stared at the note for a long time, my mind racing. What could my grandfather possibly have to do with Margaret's vendetta against my truck? And who was this mysterious friend? The next evening found me sitting on a bench at Riverside Park, watching the last light fade from the autumn sky. The park was nearly empty except for a few joggers and a woman walking her dog in the distance. I was beginning to think this was some kind of prank when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Jake Morrison? I turned to see a woman in her 70s, silver-haired and wearing a simple blue coat. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her until she sat down beside me. I'm Dorothy Chen. I live at 428 Maple Grove Lane, the little yellow house 3 doors down from you. I remembered her now. She'd been one of the few neighbors who'd smiled and waved when I'd first moved in, though we'd never formally met. Mrs. Chen, did you send me that note? She nodded, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been debating whether to tell you this story for weeks, but after I saw what happened Monday morning, saw you help Margaret despite how she's treated you, I realized you deserved to know the truth. What truth? Dorothy took a deep breath as if steeling herself for a difficult confession. Your grandfather didn't just live in this neighborhood, Jake. He built it. I blinked, confused. What do you mean he built it? Samuel Morrison Construction. That was your grandfather's company. In 1987, he purchased 40 acres of farmland and developed the entire Maple Grove subdivision. Every house, every street, every sidewalk, your grandfather designed and built it all. My head was spinning. My grandfather had been a construction worker, not a developer. He'd lived modestly, driven an old sedan, kept to himself. The idea that he'd built an entire neighborhood seemed impossible. I don't understand. Grandpa Sam worked construction his whole life, but he wasn't wealthy. He wasn't a developer. Dorothy's expression grew sad. That's where the story gets complicated, and where Margaret Whitfield comes in. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Jake. Self-taught architect, skilled craftsman, natural businessman. In the early 1980s, he saw potential in that farmland, close to the city but still affordable, perfect for young families starting out. She opened the folder, revealing architectural drawings in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. I'd seen similar sketches in his workshop as a child, though I'd never understood their significance. He spent 3 years planning Maple Grove, not as some exclusive enclave, but as an affordable community where working families could build good lives. Look at these original plans. The drawings were beautiful, modest homes with large yards, wide streets designed for children to play safely, common areas for neighbors to gather. It was the vision of someone who understood what made a neighborhood truly livable. But development costs money, Dorothy continued. Your grandfather needed investors. That's where he made his mistake. She turned to a legal document that made my stomach drop. He partnered with Whitfield Development Corporation, Margaret's late husband, Richard Whitfield. Margaret's husband was his business partner? More than that. Richard Whitfield was a smooth-talking businessman who convinced your grandfather to sign over 60% ownership of the project in exchange for financing. Sam kept 40% and the title of project manager, but Richard held controlling interest. I was beginning to see where this was going, but Dorothy wasn't finished with her story. The development was hugely successful. Every house sold before construction was completed. The profits were enormous, over $2 million in 1987 money. But when it came time to divide the earnings, she pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1988. The headline read, "Local developer dies in skiing accident." Below was a photo of Richard Whitfield, a handsome man in his 40s with Margaret standing beside him at some charity event. Richard died in Switzerland just 3 months after the last house was sold. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? You think Margaret had something to do with her husband's death? Dorothy shrugged. I can't prove anything, but I can tell you what happened next. Richard's will left everything to Margaret, including his 60% stake in Maple Grove. But here's the thing. Your grandfather's original partnership agreement included a clause that if either partner died, their shares would revert to the surviving partner at the original investment value, not the market value. My breath caught. So, Grandpa Sam should have inherited Richard's stake? Exactly. But Margaret hired expensive lawyers who argued that the clause was invalid due to some technicality in the filing. The case went to court, and your grandfather, who couldn't afford the legal fees, was forced to settle. What kind of settlement? Dorothy's expression grew grim. He kept his house, lot 432, and received $50,000. Margaret kept everything else. The remaining profits, the ongoing property management fees, and most importantly, control of the homeowners association that would govern the neighborhood your grandfather had created. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. So Margaret stole my grandfather's life's work, and she's been profiting from it ever since. Every HOA fee, every fine, every special assessment for the past 35 years has gone into her pocket. She's made millions from your grandfather's vision while he lived modestly on his construction wages. The pieces were falling into place. That's why she wants me gone. I'm a reminder of what she did. Partly, but there's more. Dorothy pulled out another document. Your grandfather never stopped fighting, Jake. He spent years documenting everything. Margaret's financial mismanagement, her use of HOA funds for personal expenses, her manipulation of neighborhood rules to benefit herself and her friends. The document was a detailed financial analysis in my grandfather's meticulous handwriting, showing discrepancies in HOA accounting that totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars over 2 decades. He was building a case against her when he died. Dorothy continued. I think Margaret knows about these documents. I think she's been waiting for the right moment to get them back, and your arrival spooked her. But why would she think I have them? Because you inherited everything in your grandfather's house, and because you look exactly like him when he was your age. Dorothy smiled sadly. Same stubborn jaw, same moral compass, same refusal to back down from a fight. I thought about the boxes in my grandfather's attic that I hadn't had time to go through yet, the filing cabinets in his workshop that I'd assumed contained old tax returns and warranties. Mrs. Chen, why are you telling me this? You've lived here for 30 years. You could have spoken up any time. Dorothy's expression hardened. Because I was a coward. Because Margaret Whitfield has made life hell for anyone who crossed her. The Thompsons at 441? They questioned an HOA expenditure in 2010, and suddenly they were hit with violation after violation until they were forced to sell at a loss. The young couple at 448 who complained about her landscaping rules? Their dog mysteriously ended up at the animal shelter, and by the time they tracked him down, he'd already been adopted out. She's been terrorizing the neighborhood for decades? With legal authority and unlimited resources, most of us just learned to keep our heads down and pay our fees. But when I watched you help her Monday morning, after everything she'd put you through, I realized some fights are worth having. We sat in silence for a few minutes, processing the weight of what she'd revealed. Finally, I found my voice. What do you think I should do? Dorothy closed the folder and handed it to me. That's up to you, Jake. But I will tell you this. Your grandfather never gave up believing that justice would eventually win out. He used to say that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep people try to bury it. As I walked home, that evening my mind was reeling. Everything I'd thought I knew about my inheritance had been turned upside down. My modest little house wasn't just a retirement gift from a loving grandfather, it was a monument to his stolen dreams and a symbol of Margaret's betrayal. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day going through my grandfather's papers with new eyes. What I'd dismissed as old receipts and maintenance records were actually detailed financial documents showing 35 years of HOA corruption, bank statements showing Margaret's personal withdrawals from community funds, contracts for community improvements that had never been completed, evidence of kickbacks from contractors who overcharged for simple maintenance projects. But the most damning document was a letter my grandfather had written but never sent, dated just 6 months before his death. To the residents of Maple Grove, my name is Samuel Morrison, and I built the community you call home. For 35 years, I have watched Margaret Whitfield systematically steal from the neighborhood I created, using her position as HOA president to Enrix.